year is 1783. The air is thick with the brine of the Atlantic and the sharp metallic tang of rusted iron. A young boy, his skin the color of polished mahogany, is forced across a threshold of cold, unforgiving stone. Behind him lies the dust of his village, the laughter of his sisters, and the protection of his father's house. Before him, there is only an infinite churning void of blue. As the heavy wooden gate groans shut, a guard leans in with a sneer that would haunt a lineage for 400 years. "Look well, little one," he says, his voice as cold as the shackles. "Once you pass this door, boy, you will never see Africa again." That boy was not just a child. He was the first of our stolen ancestors, a living piece of a continent being torn apart limb by limb. That portal was the door of no return. It was never meant to be a doorway in the traditional sense. It was a metaphysical guillotine. It was designed to sever the branch from the root so cleanly that the branch would forget it ever belonged to a tree. It was a machine of erasure, a place where names were replaced by numbers and humans were rebranded as cargo. For 4 centuries, we have been told that this was the end of the story, that the door only swings one way. If this resonates with your sense of justice, do not leave. Like this video, comment your thoughts, and subscribe, not for us, but to keep the flame of dignity burning. We are told that history is written by the victors, but the truth is that history is often written by those who hold the keys to the dungeons. For 12 million souls, the Atlantic was not a sea, but a sprawling, watery grave. It was a chasm intended to be so wide that no memory could ever cross it. Our stolen ancestors were marched through that darkness in a silence so profound it seemed to swallow the sun. They were stripped of their clothes, their jewelry, and eventually their very identities. They were told that their gods were dead and their motherland was a place of darkness they should be glad to leave behind. Yet there is a stubbornness in the African spirit that defies the laws of physics. They took the bodies, yes. They took the labor undeniably. They took the names cruelly, but they could not take the rhythm of the blood. In the deepest nights on the plantations of Virginia, in the humid heat of the Carolinas, and in the crowded tenements of Harlem, the memory of that door remained like a phantom limb. It was a dull ache, a feeling of being half home, even when standing on American soil. We became a people defined by a gap, a missing piece of a puzzle that we were told had been lost at the bottom of the ocean. Today, however, the geopolitical tides are turning. The silence of the dungeons is being broken by a new generation of African voices. Leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré are rising to remind the world that Africa is not a museum of past tragedies, but a powerhouse of future sovereignty. They are beginning to ask the questions that were forbidden for centuries. If the door was closed by force, can it not be opened by will? If our ancestors were stolen, can their grandchildren not be invited back? The world is watching as the descendants of those who were discarded as cargo are now being addressed as family. We are witnessing a moment where the map of the heart is being redrawn and the Atlantic is no longer a barrier but a bridge. But before we can celebrate the reunion, we must confront the long, cold winter of the soul that lasted for generations. We must ask ourselves what happens to a people when they are told for 400 years that they have no home to return to. The answer lies not in the history books of the West, but in the whispered stories passed down from grandmother to grandchild in the dead of night. Because the most dangerous thing you can give a person who has lost everything is a reason to remember. And as we shall see, the memory of the stolen is about to become the anthem of the returned. For generations, the history of our stolen ancestors was not found in libraries, but in the calloused palms of those who toiled in the cotton fields of Alabama and the tobacco rows of Virginia. It was a history written in the secret language of spirituals, where crossing the river was never just about a physical body of water, but a spiritual yearning for the soil that had been ripped from beneath their feet. Imagine a small wooden porch in rural Alabama, circa 1930. An elderly woman, her face a map of 1,000 sorrows, pulls her grandson close as the sun dips below the horizon. She doesn't have a map. She doesn't have a passport. She doesn't even have her original family name. But she whispers a truth that would outlast the empire that enslaved her child. We don't know exactly where Africa is on the paper, but never mind. Africa knows exactly where we are. This was the invisible thread. While the world tried to tell us that we were a people without a past, our elders knew that we were a people with a paused destiny. The Atlantic slave trade didn't just move bodies, it attempted to murder the concept of home. And it tried to convince the African in America that they were an accident of history, a byproduct of a transaction. But you cannot sell a soul that belongs to the earth. You cannot auction off a spirit that still hears the drums of the Sahel in the thumping of its own heart. Let us take a moment here not to rush forward, but to give thanks. Write a comment with a simple thank you to the spirit of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, to the resilience of Burkina Faso, or to the very concept of sovereignty itself. Gratitude is not a mere formality. It is a form of recognition, a way of expressing dignity through words. When you add your voice of thanks, you are not just engaging with a video, you are standing in solidarity with a story of freedom and pride that was almost extinguished. So before we continue this journey, take this pause to comment on your thank you. Together, those words become a beacon of light that shines far beyond the screen, reaching across the very ocean that once divided us. As the decades turned into a century, the descendants of those stolen ancestors built empires of their own in the West. They became the doctors of Baltimore, the teachers of Detroit, and the engineers of Houston. They achieved the American dream, yet for many that dream remained haunted by a continental-shaped hole in their identity. You see it in the eyes of a successful grandfather in Chicago as he looks at a map of West Africa. He has the house, the car, and the pension, but he still carries the unspoken question: where would I be if the door had never closed? This was not just nostalgia, it was a profound ancestral grief. It was the weight of knowing that somewhere across that blue void there was a village that still remembered a name that had been forgotten in America. There was a plot of land that was missing its steward. There was a lineage that had been fractured, leaving millions of people as permanent strangers in a land that benefited from their sweat, but often rejected their humanity. The Western narrative spent 400 years telling the diaspora that Africa was a place to escape from, a land of poverty, conflict, and despair. They wanted us to be ashamed of the very soil that birthed us, but while the media showed us images of famine, they hid the images of our kings. While they spoke of darkness, they obscured the golden light of our civilizations. However, a secret fire was being tended. In the mid-20th century, the winds began to shift. The year of Africa was approaching, and the children of the stolen were beginning to look across the water, not with fear, but with a burning, unquenchable curiosity. The silence was about to be broken by a roar that would shake the foundations of the colonial world. The year 1964 marked a tectonic shift in the spiritual geography of the world. A man who had been renamed Little, then renamed X, stood upon the sun-drenched earth of the motherland. Malcolm X did not arrive in Africa as a tourist seeking a holiday. He arrived as a seeker returning to the source. When he looked out over the bustling markets and the rising tide of independence, he uttered words that shattered 4 centuries of colonial propaganda. I am not visiting Africa. I am returning home. He saw that the struggle in Harlem was the same struggle as in Accra, that the chains of Jim Crow were forged from the same iron as the shackles of the colonial governor. Malcolm was building a bridge across the Atlantic, a bridge of the mind that the powers of the era found more terrifying than any army. They feared a world where the descendants of stolen ancestors looked past their American reality and saw their African potential. Before we reveal the next chapter, which is perhaps the most powerful assertion of sovereignty you will ever hear, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If this channel has moved you, if these stories are touching something deep in your spirit, then consider becoming a member, not for exclusive content or perks, but because supporting this channel is directly supporting narratives that mainstream media refuses to tell. Every membership is a vote for Africa Unchained's mission. Every member becomes a co-creator of the revolution we are documenting. Join us. Stand with the principle that African wealth belongs to Africa. But the bridge Malcolm built was met with the cold steel of an assassin's bullet. The dream of a Pan-African reunion was driven underground, yet it found a new heartbeat in the 1980s in a land called Burkina Faso. There, a young captain named Thomas Sankara rose to power. He was the upright man who believed that Africa would never be free until Africans everywhere from the favelas of Brazil to the streets of London stood together as one fist. Sankara spoke of a debt that could never be repaid and a dignity that could never be sold. He taught his people to plant their own food and weave their own destiny. Yet once again, the light was seemingly snuffed out. For decades, the world thought the era of the revolutionary African leader was dead. They thought the African diaspora had finally been integrated, assimilated, and domesticated into the Western machine. They believed we had forgotten the stolen ancestors who were marched through the stone doors of the Gold Coast. But history is not a straight line. It is a circle. Fast forward to the present day. A new voice has emerged from the Sahel carrying the echo of Sankara and the fire of Malcolm. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has stepped onto the world stage, not to beg for aid, but to demand respect. He understands something that many before him missed. Africa's greatest resource is not the gold in its soil or the oil beneath its waves. It is the millions of brilliant, resilient, and longing hearts scattered across the globe. Traoré has begun to speak a language that the diaspora has been waiting centuries to hear. It is a language of invitation, but not one of desperation. He isn't asking for the diaspora to come and save Africa. He is asking them to come and reclaim it. He has made it clear that the sovereignty of Burkina Faso, and indeed the whole of Africa, is incomplete as long as its children are still searching for their reflection in the mirrors of their oppressors. The revolution we are leading. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has suggested in his addresses is not just for those of us within these borders. It is for every person who carries African blood and feels the weight of the chains their ancestors wore. And he is calling for a global alliance of intellect, culture, and power. But the world is not standing idly by. As the call for reunion grows louder, the old colonial structures are tightening their grip. They are terrified of what happens when the grandson of a Detroit factory worker and the grandson of a Burkinabe farmer realize they are fighting the same enemy. The question is no longer if the door will open, but who will have the courage to walk through it first. Because the powers that be know one thing: a family reunited is a force that no empire can ever hope to contain. And as the 21st century unfolds, we are about to see just how far some are willing to go to keep that door locked forever. For many of you watching today, the journey back to the motherland has been more than a physical distance. It has been a psychological marathon. We think of the retired teacher in Detroit who spent 40 years educating other people's children while secretly wondering where her own family tree began. We think of the veteran in Texas who fought in foreign wars under a flag that did not always love him back, carrying a faded photograph of a grandmother whose maiden name was lost to the ledger of a slave ship. These are the living legacies of our stolen ancestors. They achieved the heights of Western success, yet they found that a mahogany desk and a suburban home could never quite muffle the ancestral whisper of the Sahel. The cost of returning was always made to feel too high. For decades, the system was designed to keep the diaspora as a permanent source of Western labor and a distant source of African remittances money sent back to a home they were never truly invited to inhabit. You were told that Africa was too dangerous, too broken, or too foreign. The gates were kept locked, not just by borders, but by the fear of being not African enough or too American. This was the final invisible chain, the idea that once you were taken, you were tainted, and the motherland had no space left for your return. Now let us turn this story into a shared moment. Take a second right here to tell us where you are watching from. Type the name of your city, your land, the soil beneath your feet. Africa Unchained reads these comments with immense gratitude, and we send to each of you a heartfelt wish. May your journey be filled with dignity. May your hands find strength, and may your road ahead be bathed in light. This is more than a video. It is a gathering of voices across the globe, proving that the distance between us is nothing compared to the spirit that binds us. But a new wind is blowing through the acacia trees of West Africa, and its name is sovereignty. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré speaks, he isn't just talking to the people in the streets of Ouagadougou. He is speaking to the soul of every person in the diaspora who has ever felt like an outsider. He is systematically dismantling the idea that Africa is a basket case in need of a handout. By asserting control over Burkina Faso's resources and demanding an end to neo-colonial interference, he is creating a new kind of home, one that is defined by pride rather than poverty. This shift is creating a massive ripple effect across the Atlantic. For the first time in centuries, the price of returning is no longer your dignity. Captain Ibrahim Traoré and his contemporaries are building a system where the diaspora is seen as the sixth region of Africa, not as tourists, but as stakeholders. They are offering citizenship land and the opportunity to build the future of the continent. They are saying to the descendants of the stolen ancestors, your skills are our strength. Your history is our history. Your return is our victory. Yet this reunion comes with its own set of risks. To walk back through that door is to challenge the very foundations of the global order. There are those who benefit from a divided African family, those who prefer the diaspora to stay in the West, disconnected and disillusioned, and those who want Africa to remain a resource to be plundered. The pressure on leaders who open these doors is immense. They are vilified in the international press, sanctioned by global institutions, and watched by the same shadows that took Sankara and Lumumba. The question for the grandmother in Alabama and the doctor in Baltimore is no longer if they can go home, but whether they are ready for the responsibility that comes with it. Because returning is not just a vacation, it is a revolutionary act. It is the final refusal to be a victim of 17th century crimes. And as the sun begins to rise over a continent that is finally standing up, we are about to witness the most spectacular reversal in human history. The very door that was meant to be a final goodbye is about to host a greeting that has been 400 years in the making. But as the people gather at the shore, a new obstacle appears on the horizon, one that will test whether this reunion is a fleeting moment or a permanent revolution. We return now to that stone portal on the edge of the Atlantic where the salt air still whispers the secrets of 4 centuries. For too long, the narrative of our stolen ancestors was a story that ended at the shoreline, a tragedy frozen in the amber of 1919 or 1865. But today, the physics of history is being rewritten. Imagine a group of men and women from Chicago, London, and Bahia standing not on the land looking out, but in the surf looking in. They are not being pushed. They are being pulled by an invisible ancient gravity. As they approach the heavy wooden gates of the slave fort, a guide, an African son of the soil, does not reach for shackles. He reaches for their hands. For centuries, he tells them, his voice thick with the gravity of the moment. People walk through this door in chains, forced to leave their souls behind. Today, you walk through it as family, bringing those souls back where they belong. And at that moment, the door of no return ceases to be a monument to a crime and becomes a monument to a resurrection. This is the sovereign Africa that leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré are fighting to protect. It is a continent that no longer defines itself by what was taken, but by what it is reclaiming. Under the vision of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the call for the diaspora to return is not a plea for charity. It is a strategic alliance of blood and intellect. It is the understanding that the revolution is incomplete as long as the family is fractured. Africa is no longer asking the world for permission to exist. It is inviting its children to help it excel. Before we close, let us pause. What you have just heard is not simply an episode of history. It is a reminder that sovereignty, dignity, and hope are still alive, waiting to be claimed by those with the courage to seek them. If this message has moved you, if it has stirred something in the depths of your spirit, then subscribe to this channel, Africa Unchained. Not because we ask for numbers, but because we are building a sanctuary, a space where the voices of independence are honored and where the stories of our pride continue to be told with the integrity they deserve. By subscribing, you are not just supporting a video. You are choosing to walk with us into the next chapter of Africa's unfolding story. You are ensuring that these narratives of truth are never silenced again. Join us and let us carry this light forward together. We began this journey with a boy in 1783, told by a guard that he would never see his home again. We were told that the Atlantic was a one-way street of sorrow. But history was wrong. The guard was wrong. The empires were wrong. Because while they could steal the body, they could never extinguish the map of the heart. Africa never stopped looking for its children, and its children never stopped dreaming of the soil. The ships that once carried our ancestors away in darkness are now in spirit and in truth bringing their grandchildren home in the light of a new dawn. The chains have been melted into tools, and the silence has been replaced by a chorus of 1 billion voices. The door that was built to signify a final goodbye has finally irrevocably become the door of reunion. Our story did not end at the shore. It was merely waiting for us to find our way back to the beginning.